We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that Mass Poetry in Salem, Massachusetts are on the ancestral territory of the Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Nomkeeg, and Agawam. Many other Indigenous communities have lived and moved through this land over hundreds of years, and many Indigenous people work and live in these regions today. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. We at Mass Poetry are intentional about ensuring that events are accessible to everyone attending and involved in the festival. We have closed captions available for this event. If you can't see them, you can turn them on by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then show subtitles. If you would like to turn them off, you can choose to hide subtitles. For anyone who is depending on auto captions today, to ensure chat messages are not popping up over the captioning, click on chat at the bottom of your screen and it will open a chat panel to the right. If you experience any trouble with this or any other logistics, please send a private chat message to myself or to Ashvarya. Regarding Zoom etiquette, please keep yourself muted unless you are invited to unmute by the speakers. There are many ways to interact with each other via the chat and the Zoom reactions button, so please feel free to use them as a way to engage. Please be kind and respectful to the event producers and your fellow participants. We will remove participants for discriminatory or harassing comments, and in such cases, participants may be banned from further festival participation. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy the event. I'm going to turn things over now to our Dr. Matthew E. Henry, our event producer for this event.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to jump right into a screen share and I hope everyone can see. A few thumbs up if everyone can see everything, everyone can hear me, all that good stuff. All right. So I'm going to assume everyone listening, everyone watching is a high school teacher. I know that is not the case, but I'm just going to keep myself sane, I'm going to do that. So give you a bit of information about me because some people care about such things. What is the purpose? What do I want to accomplish? I'm going to give you some thoughts about anti-racism, anti-racist teaching, give some examples of classroom activities, as well as some poems and resources. If I accomplish those three things, I think I've done my job. So a little background information. Matthew Henry, Matt, that's how I publish. I am the ADHD kid in that class, in your classroom. You're thinking of that kid, I am still him. Educational background, I taught English for a number of years and then went to the college level and then regained my sanity and went back to teaching high school English. For whatever reason, I did a master's degree in theology and got a PhD in education. I want to be in debt forever. So, that's how I roll. I am a writer. My same shameless plug. I have 2 chaplets of poetry, a forthcoming book next year. I dabble in prose. I just got an acceptance last night, which I'm very happy, which was followed by like 3 rejections. So that's the life that I live. But this next piece, Raisin in a Bowl of Milk, that is a quote from one of my current seniors who is graduating soon. I was a Metco student. I was bused out to Wellesley. I currently work in Metco district. And when talking with one of my kids, he said, we're raisins in a bowl of milk. We are often the only Black or brown faces around. So for me, elementary school, middle school, high school, all of my college experiences and professionally, I've often been the only Black or brown face in a room or in an entire district or institution. And so putting those parts of my life together, both as a writer and as being a proud Black man, this isn't academic for me. It is my life, and having conversations with my own students around what it means to really think about race and the interactions that we have with each other is very important for selfish reasons and also because I think it matters. So to that end, I I want to know what your purposes are. I'm not asking you out loud, but some of you might be here because you want some ideas for Be Nice to Minority lessons or units. Like, is that your mindset that doing anti-racist work with poetry is like one lesson or one unit opposed to being over the course of the entire year? Is it checking off a SMART goal for evaluation purposes? I know some of my colleagues and some folks that I know, it's what this is all about. Like, they have an administrator who said, we need to talk about diversity. And they threw a SMART goal in about diversity. I taught a lesson, done. Is it more about engaging your kids or engaging the school community in really difficult and needed conversations? Or trying to create some change that's sustained? So I want to talk about classroom environment. The actual layout is important. So these are just some thoughts to be running through your heads before we jump into the meat. We're going to be in some breakout rooms later on and do some awkward work with each other. But first, thinking about your own classrooms. Are you having kids in rows? Or are they actually in a circle where they can see each other face to face? Or this year with everything on Zoom, yeah, we know. Are there cameras on when they're having these conversations with each other? What is the racial and ethnic makeup of the classroom itself? I work in a predominantly white institution. There are classrooms that I have where I am the only person of color in the room. There are other classrooms where the makeup is different, but I know that the poems that I choose and the conversations that I have to be thinking about that on the front end. Other political or social demographic issues within your classroom that you need to be aware of. Are there parents who, the second you bring out a certain poem, they're going to be on the phone with your administrator? Does your administrator have your back when you're trying to have these conversations? Like, those are real things that need to be thought about before just diving into the work. Who will support you? Who has your back in your department? Who doesn't? How comfortable are the kids with each other? There's a book that we use in our school, American Born Chinese. Great resource, great material, but some of my coworkers use it as the very first thing, the very first unit, the very first lesson with their kids. They didn't know each other well enough to have these difficult conversations about race, opposed to those who found a lot more success when they waited to the middle of the year or the end of the year, where the kids just know each other better and more comfortable. I don't necessarily recommend it. It's like, let's discuss the N-word day one. That probably is not going to fly in most communities. But then also, how comfortable are the kids with you? And we're going to talk more about this, but the vulnerability. Do you put yourself in a position where they know what you think, you know what they think, and they know there's going to be honesty there? You'll get all these slides at the end. I'm just going to run them through them really quickly. But yeah, how comfortable are you with discomfort in the classroom? How comfortable are you with a student making a statement or asking a question and everything just gets silent? And it's not over Zoom. And so that, they're actually seeing each other's faces. Can you sit with that discomfort for a little while? What is your comfort level with anti-racist conversations? And that obviously is going to depend on your own experiences, the things you've said, the things you've done. I've seen it where a student has made a statement and there's another adult in the room and I can see it running through their head. Wait, I've been that person who has made that microaggression, or I've been the person who said that racist thing when I was younger, or I've been in that situation where that thing has happened to me. What is your comfort level with engaging the students? Which goes to the third point. Are you willing to be vulnerable with your kids? One of my big things for all of my lessons, whatever I do, is I'm really real with them. They know what I'm thinking. I try to know what they're thinking, and I'll put myself out there. To that end, I'm going to read, selflessly plug one of my own poems that my students have read. It's called When Asked Why All Lives Don't Matter. After a deep breath, I attempted to explain. My aunt had breast cancer. Despite a healthy dose of science and scripture, prayers and prescriptions, the shadows never did. We celebrated her life, mourned the hole her grave dug in ours. We lauded her loving kindness, questioned the natural shocks flesh is heir to, why this disease would claim a wife, a coworker, a friend, an aunt. At the repast, heads turned to the future, saving other sons and daughters, ourselves. A collection was taken to fund breast cancer research. A medical scholarship for oncology study discussed. A proposal for new. From the back of the church hall, a woman no one recognized screamed, "What about ovarian cancer and prostate cancer? Why aren't you all talking about those? All cancers matter." Most of my students nodded into the ensuing silence. But some blank stares and my job description doomed me to be more didactic, to explain appropriate time, place, and manner, intent versus impact, the guilt and shame required to derail communal grief and hijack a narrative to make oneself more comfortable. I explained the human duty to choose. Enter the room willing to bear bodies on our shoulders, or arms empty, leave and silently stand outside. I said replace cancer with lives, and waited. Through a weird set of happenstance, this poem was used by everyone in my school because the department head was like, we should do this. So there had the oddness of knowing that everyone in the building had read this, but most of my colleagues took my name off of it. So I got to hear responses from students and from my colleagues about how people process this poem. But there were also students in the building who were like, I was in the room when this happened. My kids know that I'll be really vulnerable and really real with them, and I expect the same from them. So we can have uncomfortable and difficult conversations, knowing that there's love and there's respect and there's understanding, while at the same time, it's gonna be difficult at times. One of the things I do with them is, and I'll give you the same excerpts that I use with my kids. We look at definitions for prejudice, discrimination, racism, anti-racism. So one of the things that I give them is an excerpt from White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. A lot of people have already read that. And when we sit down and discuss what prejudice is, like the thoughts that everybody has, they can usually track with that. Then we talk about discrimination, acting on those thoughts in some way. And that action could not just be, racial slurs or, violence of some kind, but also ignoring somebody or excluding them in some way. And they track with that. Then when we talk about racism itself, things get a little bit, well, that's not what it says in the dictionary that I have right here in front of me, or when I went on dictionary.com. All right, let's have a philological conversation about why dictionaries themselves have racist. But when we talk about the collective prejudice of a racial group, and that DiAngelo says that within the US context, only white people can be racist, then the conversation gets more awkward. Well, what about reverse racism? And then we have to have that conversation. But we've set the stage that we can have those conversations openly and honestly, and it can be difficult and awkward. With DiAngelo, I also pair Kennedy's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And we spend time going through, all right, racist, one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. And they love this. I give them DiAngelo first and I lull them into a false sense of security. And then they get to this and they're like, yeah, that's great, yeah. Racist policy, action or inaction. And there's one kid in the back who always raises his hand and says, wait, that inaction part. Does that mean if I hear a racist joke in the cafeteria and I don't call my friend out on it, I'm a racist? Silence. And then we have that difficult and uncomfortable conversation. But the pump has been primed that they understand, yeah, what do we do with that? If you don't act, and you've been learning this lesson since you were in kindergarten, right? Be a buddy, not a bully. Stand up, don't be a bystander. In terms of race, or if you're not doing the same thing, does that make you a racist? And we talk about assimilationist mindsets versus segregationist mindsets, and really diving into the work of saying that an anti-racist is one who says everybody is equal. All racial groups are equal, but we need to do something about the systems that get in the way that hold people back. And really honestly saying, well, how are you doing things that hold yourself back? How are you doing things that are holding your classmates, people who you say you're friends? Some of you want to date these people. Are you really thinking about the mindsets that you have as you interact with your colleagues in the room? So here are 4 things that I keep in mind while I'm planning my own lessons, and we're gonna be in breakout rooms in a moment. And again, you'll be doing some of this awkward work yourself. We're gonna pretend it's the end of the year and you've gotten to know each other really, really well. 4 things I keep in mind. First thing, the purpose. My purpose with my kids is honest reflection and conversation. Bottom line. Like, I would love to change hearts and minds in that moment, and they leave after one class period going, we've solved racism, yay. That's never gonna happen. But honest reflection and conversation, that they can really look at themselves and then also look at their classmates and their experiences. Do I want this lesson to be specified, or is it about student choice? There are times when I'm saying, all right, I want everyone in the room to read this poem. I don't care what your race or ethnicity is, you're gonna process this together and do the hard work. Bet. There are other times when it's, I want you to choose. What resonates with you? Why does it resonate with you? Why did you pick this poem over this other poem? And then we're gonna do something with it. Public versus private response is huge. Is this something where we're all gonna, as a whole class, talk about this? And so then you need to put yourself out there to other people that you believe or think this thing? Or is it more about a small group setting, a couple of people, maybe that you've chosen, or that I put you in a group because I'm evil and I want you to talk to each other? Or is it private? Is it just something that's only coming, well, semi-private, it's only coming to me? Every once in a while, I'll give them an assignment where it's, write just to yourself. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to see it. But then I don't know that they're actually processing because they're high school students. Yeah, I did that journal work that you're never going to check. Sure. I didn't do it when I was a student. Why am I expecting them to do that? And last but not least, which is, this one's sort of big for me, everything's not trauma-based. Everything isn't just white people are bad. And this should be, this is the personal thing for me, this should be the case for like everything that we do that is talking about marginalized communities or groups, whether that's race or gender or sexuality or identification of any kind. It's not, it shouldn't just be, all right, it's Black History Month, so we're gonna learn about slavery, burning crosses, assassinating Malcolm X, and oh wait, and Obama was president. But then we're gonna show pictures of people wanting to hang him. Like, can it also be stories of like joy? Can the poems that we're using, the materials that we're using about any marginalized group also just, showing us in our element happy, not all trauma-based. And that second part about not all white people are bad poems, because like where I work right now, predominantly white. The conversations I've had with some of my young white males who say, all I feel all the time is everyone telling me that I'm the enemy. I'm the oppressor of women, I'm the oppressor of minorities, like that's all they feel. So if it's just poetry or any literature that's just reinforcing that, they tune out real quick. So can everyone see themselves in a way that's not always just negative or seeing someone else as the enemy? Okay, so here's what's about to happen. You're going to be thrown into breakout rooms. If our wonderful volunteers could throw into the chat the link for the folder. I'm going to ask each of you to pick one poem out of that folder. You got to pick it quickly because I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So pick just picking my title, pick up a poem and then read through that poem. Pick one line, one image, one thought that stands out to you. And when you're in your break room, explain briefly. I'm assuming we're all English teachers, so we can talk for very long periods of time. Briefly share that line, that image, and why it stood out to you, why it spoke to you, why it hit the way that it did, and be a little vulnerable. It might be that you picked something that was about your own identity. It might be something that just the title just stood out to you for whatever reason. But own the folder, pick a poem, pick a line, image, or thought that stands out to you in that poem after you've read through it. And then in your breakout rooms, please share with each other about that. Come on. And we know some people are live streaming, so I'm going to throw up a poem for everyone to see. Here we go. Is my screen still sharing or no? No, all right. Let me try to get that to work again. It's sharing now, I hope. There we go. So this is a poem of mine for those who are on live stream. It's called Self-Evident. A little of my own background. As a kid from Boston, the Revolutionary War was my favorite subject in 4th grade. A tea party I could respect, class trips vainly searching for musket balls and Lexington treetops, reading of decapitations by cannonball on Breed's Hill. Even the sites in Southie, unsafe for me to visit, were a source of tribal pride, like rooting for the Patriots. We were told to don our colonial imagination caps and tell our story of emancipation from the British. Where would we be? The Old South Meeting House? The Old North Church? What would we see as we rose to American greatness? Our teachers should hear freedom ringing in the streets through our words. I dropped my head to begin, oversized pencil in hand, until I remembered. Seeing my inaction, she crouched and began to re-explain. I patiently waited for her to finish, eyes on her lips, then asked if she wanted me to pretend to be white, or to picture myself for sale on the steps of Faneuil Hall, or stacked in one half of the harbor ships leading to and from the West Indies, explaining my parents' patois. After the vocal static, the hems and haws of white noise, she suggested Crispus Attucks, the hometown boy, the black hero of the Boston Massacre. My siblings had taught me the one-drop rule and when to nod my head politely. So I pretended he was not half Wampanoag, that Framingham was not his master's home, and imagined myself being the first unarmed Black man shot on these urban streets. So for those who are still in the main session, as well as those who are have questions that you could send in via YouTube live stream, what are images or thoughts or moments from this poem that stood out to you? And even though it's mine, you can say it's terrible. Thick skin. I work with high school students.
The thing that actually stuck out to me personally is that I am from Massachusetts and I grew up in Framingham. And the just all the images in this poem were very much hit home, because this is very I also I identified very much with almost everything in this poem, and I recognized every Massachusetts specific thing that you that you referenced, and I was like, this feels like yeah, it's like when you hear a poem and read a poem and it's just you, and this has just felt like it's like when something points to exactly your experience, and that's what poetry really does, is when it really brings branches understanding between people. And so I just really felt that.
I really like the perception of history, right? Depending who you are in this poem, and what this historical site means to one person and what it means to another person, right? And it's such a stark contrast in thinking about the musket holes in the trees or being sold on the steps of Faneuil Hall, right? Like the images that you contrast and that are just very stark and memorable. You did a really nice job in this.
I think what really stood out to me is how the poem exemplifies that teachers also have a lot to learn. Thinking about anti-racist education and everyone kind of coming in with the sense that you can learn from everyone else. So I can imagine for students reading this being like, hey, I could have something I could point out to my teacher that they don't know. And for teachers to sort of remember that it's also part of their job to be open to that, especially when thinking about racism, when your students might have very different experiences from you. So I thought that was a very, it was very moving. So I think it's this specific moment where it says, you know, I patiently waited for her to finish. So that's the tension between them is so well embodied. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I was gonna say, yeah, definitely, because that's what I feel like that really points to what I was trying to get at, which is that like this is very much this like feels very much the, like I said, like conversations that I remember having with many of my I'm like right now I'm having like exact flashbacks to going on like school field trips into Boston. Like I said, because I grew up in Framingham, and like we would go into school field trips. And I remember in the 10th grade, we went on a field trip that was like a walk around all of these to all of these different places in Boston. And like I said, like growing up around here, like these are places that I knew, but it was like it's a whole different context.
Yeah, I ended up writing this poem both from personal experience, like this is almost 100% accurate, but then also when I was a professor of education, and working with all age groups, all levels of teachers who are going to be teaching all age groups. This is a conversation I often had with not just my social studies teachers, but also my elementary school teachers. And like I gave them this example of experiencing this, and it was interesting how a lot of the students of color had a moment like this. Like they could think of being in the classroom and they realized my teacher was developing a lesson that was forgetting that I was there. And my Jewish students have said the exact same thing. Like we're going to talk about the Holocaust, and everyone stops and just like turns them up to them. We're going to talk about slavery. Everyone stops and look at the black student. I had a student once who families from Iran and hid the fact that they were from Iran because they didn't want to deal with all of like the terrible things that had been said to them. And a teacher outed them one day when talking about the Iranian Revolution. It was like, so what did your family experience? And just that mindset that teachers need to have going into lessons, thinking there are other voices in the room, and how do we talk about those voices? How do we show the experiences of another group without doing more damage by pointing out like horrific moments, but at the same time ignoring the fact that there was like some horror there. That the old example of, well, there's a student, we're going to talk about slavery in class. Do we make the black kid read from that? I had another teacher who once and I wrote a poem about this, of course, did a slave auction in class. And it was this interesting moment where like actually has a student stand up on the desk and like did a slave auction, AP US history. White male, but he chose another white male student to be the slave. And I remember being the high school junior being like, I am so conflicted with like what we're seeing is horrific and terrible, but at least my teacher was thinking enough to say, well, maybe I should not pick the black kid in the room to do this. Are we as teachers thinking about what we are doing to our kids when we're having these conversations? And at the same time, are we putting things in front of them where it says, hey, let's be open and honest? Can we allow our students to call us out when we do make a mistake about something, or we make them feel uncomfortable? Is it a safe enough room that they can pull you aside afterwards and go, yeah, that was not cool. Think about this for next year or not. And I know I've been in that situation myself, where students have said, hey, can we talk about this differently next time? And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm a horrible human being. I will be better. I will be better. If we can bring everyone back from their breakout rooms, that would be wonderful. And they'll all jump back in. And we know everyone's going to be like in the middle of a sentence as they come back in, and it'll be very bitter, but you know, it's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I just set the breakout rooms to close, so they will automatically, they've been invited to come back and they will automatically close in about 40 seconds.
Okay. As everyone's coming back in, the next poem that everyone's going to be looking at is going to be the poem Misunderstandings. You can have that link ready to go in the chat. It'll be Bundabar. Hello, everyone. As you're coming back, I can see some people's faces are like, okay, okay, all right. So I'm assuming some people had like some interesting conversations. Like, there are no open tears, so that's a good sign. If no one's, there's some smiles, so I'm assuming like everyone made it back. Everyone's alive. Feel free to share in the chat, just like real quick, like what did that feel like? So not necessarily like what are the things that got shared, but just what did that activity feel like? Was it good? Was it bad? Like emotional constipation as a result? Like, how did it feel?
Well, I'll just say that opening your folder was really exhilarating because there was just such a rich mix of poems there, a list of poems. It made you very eager to open them all, which wasn't the point of the lesson, but it was. That's a great. Looks like a great resource, and thank you for that.
No worries. And like I said, at the very end, I'm going to be giving you guys a handout that just has a bunch of stuff in it. Some that might be useful, some that might not be at all. So yeah, be reading through the chat and seeing what other people wrote. And we're going to be back into a different set of breakout rooms in a moment, doing a slightly different activity. Exposing, yes. Exciting. Different. Fun. I don't think we're supposed to have fun in schools, right? Like that was, I feel like I was told that at some point. It was like, no, if the kids are having fun, you've done something wrong. No smiling before Christmas, or I don't remember what it was, something like that. We're gonna look at a slightly different way of doing things, the specified / student choice public response. In the chat, we're gonna share the poem Misunderstanding. And this is actually a poem written by a student. There are two questions I'm going to want you to discuss with your group. How does the title relate to the poem? Easy one. And have you personally ever lived through an event similar to this? When and how did it happen? Just those two questions. How does the title relate to the poem, Misunderstanding? And have you ever lived through an event similar to this? When, how, and what happened? Same rules apply in your breakout room. Briefly share your answers and be a little vulnerable. And as I say to my kids, the first question might be a trick. It might be deeper than you think on the front end. So we can throw everyone back into breakout rooms. And I'll throw this poem up. And as I've been speaking a lot, can I have a volunteer in our main session who'd be willing to read it for me?
I can read it.
Go for it.
Misunderstanding. When I was around Mexicans, they were speaking Spanish, which made me afraid. People moved mouths, made sounds, but no words escaped. I walked, looking at them with suspicion, scared that they were talking about my faults. Angrily, I told them to speak English. Uncomfortably, they laughed in a disdainful way and yelled at me, "Go away, you Chinese." Inside, my throat suddenly appeared a small stone. I am not Chinese. You don't understand.
Thank you. And those two questions were title related to the poem, and then just personally, like how does this poem hit for you? Have you been in a situation like this? If so, how? If not, why not?
I just love the kind of dual misunderstanding that goes on here, right? You know, the idea that they're talking about me and they should let me know in my own language what they're saying about me. And there's that kind of perception. And then, you know, mischaracterizing the student at the same time. And it's just a really succinct, wonderful poem. And you know, I'm always talking to students about getting the image right in the poem, right? And that small stone image is perfect, and it really is hard to describe that feeling in any better way than that. Just that you feel it creeping up, and it's stuck right there, you know. I just thought it was great.
I think this poem speaks so well to what you were talking about earlier around not looking simply as who is causing harm and receiving harm. I think it's such a effective use of poems slowly revealing things, because in the initial moments, what might we as readers assume about the identity of the perpetrator in the scene? And then also it's like, yeah, even people who have identities that experience oppression cause harm to each other. And where does that come from? What do we do about it? And yeah, it's really amazing how small of a poem it is that's so richly packed with all of these questions.
Yeah, the thing that it struck in me was thinking about how a lot of people tend to misunderstand or ask me a lot of "what are you" type questions. Because I'm biracial, a lot of people seem to just assume a lot of things about me, about just asking me all sorts of invasive questions about my racial background, because they seem to think that because I have like an ambiguous skin tone, it just invites all sorts of questions, and they can just ask whatever they want.
Did any of you make any assumptions about the people who are speaking Spanish? Did you assume that they actually were Spanish because the speaker of the poem said that they were Mexican? Like that was something that I didn't even catch. Like when I've been using this poem for years, and one of my students, who I believe was from Honduras, was like, "Are we going to talk about the fact that the speaker assumed that they were Mexicans, just in the same way people assume that I'm Mexican, but I'm from Honduras, just because?" I was like, "Yes, that is brilliant."
Yeah, that was actually the first thing I thought of, because I speak Spanish, but I'm not from a Spanish-speaking country. I just speak Spanish because I was taught it in school, and I have an uncle who's from Nicaragua, but he's not like a blood relation uncle. But when I tell people that I have an uncle from Nicaragua, they just assume that I'm also from Nicaragua.
You know, that's a really interesting question, right? Because I just guiltily assumed the authority of the speaker of the poem, right? That this person this was his experience or her experience, and they knew what they were talking about. And, you know, but it's wonderful question to pin to someone about, well, you know, are we sure that they were really Mexicans, right?
The other interesting part about this poem for me, teaching over the years, is that I've taught it in right outside of Denver, Colorado, and as well as like in suburbs of Boston. And when I first taught this, like when I first came across the poem, the makeup of my class was mostly Latino, Hispanic, and AAPI. And that was a demographic in the room. And so their sharing about this poem, like their conversation about this poem was like, this is every day for us. Or like they had specific moments in the cafeteria, in the hallways, in the classroom. And like we could really unpack that. Whereas where I work now, when I use this poem, where it's majority white students with some Asian population, I'm usually the only Black person in the room, and we have very few Latinx people in the room. It's a completely different vibe that they come away from, but they still all can, like, they can all still understand, even if it's not a language barrier. Maybe like every once in a while, a student will be like, well, yeah, you know, if I'm being honest, sometimes when I see like the Black kids in the hallway and they're being really loud, like it makes me uncomfortable. And then, you know, they're looking at me. I'm like, well, are they looking at you because they're talking about you, or are they looking at you because you've been staring at them because you think that they're scared? Like, oh yeah, that is what's sort of the same thing happening in the poem. Like it's a different way of coming at it, but they all tend to arrive at the humanity in the middle of it, right? Like the idea that there's fear and that they're high school students, and we'll look at somebody else and go, they must be talking about me because I'm 14, 15, 16, and the world revolves around me. Everyone's talking about me all the time. It must be about my faults. Yeah.
You know, there's that old expression, I may not be much, but I'm all I think about, right?
If we can grab our wonderful folks back from their breakout sessions a little bit early, I want to leave time to make sure we get to their activity.
Yeah, I just invited them back.
Perfect. I'll just actually leave the poem up there as they come back in. I think I mentioned this before, but the writer of this was a high school student when it was written. Like this was a high school student writing from their own perspective, which is another piece that I enjoy when having a conversation about this poem with my students. Being like, this was someone your age who was writing about their own experience. This wasn't like an old adult like me thinking back in my day when I was young and dealt with racism. Like this was someone their age who wrote this. One last one that I want us to look at is this poem, again, a modern poem, just published a little while ago, called It's Not Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And the question with this is slightly different. Could you ever live through an event similar to this? Why or why not? I think with the other poem, everybody in some way, shape, or form could relate to like misunderstandings, you know, whether it's like racially or culturally or religiously. Like, you know, this poem's a little bit different. It pushes the envelope of recognizing that there are certain things that can happen to some people and not to others. So hence the could you ever live through an event similar to this? Why or why not? So we could throw this poem in the chat. I will throw it up there again. In your breakout rooms for this last one, briefly share your answers, be a little vulnerable or a lot vulnerable on this one, depending. So send them away to the breakout rooms. Hey, may I have one more volunteer to read this last poem for us?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Thank you.
Y'all scroll for me.
Yeah.
It's not always sunny in Philadelphia. The first play I ever tried out for was The Passion, also known as the last 72 hours of Christ's life. I thought this was my moment. My name means bearer of Christ. My skin is the color of burnt brass. My hair back then was reminiscent of sheep's wool. When the hour arrived to choose which boy would represent our Savior, the honor was given to the child with the most white privilege. If God has the complexion of soil, why is it the opportunity to portray him is not provided to the meek, but to those who have inherited the earth already?
Thank you. I'll try to make it a little bit smaller so you can see more of the poem at the same time. But yeah, the question is, could you live through this? Like, could you be the speaker of this poem? Why or why not?
I have been the speaker of this poem in terms of I've tried out for roles and not like I've auditioned for roles and not gotten them in favor of different white students, and it definitely feels it definitely feels again, it feels like something that I have a very raw connection to this poem, especially because it's a large part of why I definitely felt a little bit less comfortable doing and auditioning for theater roles as I got older and stopped doing so after high school.
I've never been overlooked for theater roles because I've never been talented enough to get one. But I've certainly been on the other side of this, and unknowingly and knowingly a product of being white and the privilege that comes along with that. So I can identify on the flip side of it.
I think something that this poem brings up for me is how we like enforce visions like on other people and on ourselves. So yeah, I think I can relate to the experience of not fitting the vision of what someone sees as X role, you know, and I think especially when you're young and you're kind of envisioning your profession or your calling, like who do we think of when we think of a poet or a doctor or an artist or an actor? And so I think it's what moves me about this poem that the speaker isn't doing that to themselves. They're like, hey, you're wrong. I should have been able to do that. And I feel like that's so important for students to see, to say, are you also putting this kind of limitation on yourself that other people maybe are irresponsibly putting on you?
There's a phrase I use with my students. I use with everybody, but with my students more often, that I won't join hands with my oppressor. And they often be like, well, that was stark. And I'm like, yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'll play devil's advocate for just about anything and like have to push their minds and push their things. But there are certain identity issues where I'm like, no, like to play the game with this not just only hurts me, but it also hurts the other people who look like me, but it also hurts those who don't look like me because they're also buying into this assimilationist or segregationist, racist mindset that we are different in these ways so that you are better or you are worse, or you deserve this role or this grade, or you should be in this class and someone else shouldn't be in this class. Or if you are in this class or you got that role, you're one of the good ones, or you're different, or you're special, not just you're normal and have talent or ability. it's one of the reasons I like this poem so much, is that you do get the speaker's sense of who they are, but at the same time, you really clearly see what they're up against. You see how other people are, at least their perception of how other people are viewing them and their worth in a way, which I think is hugely important for students to be thinking about from either end of the spectrum, whether they feel like they are the one being oppressed or the one that potentially are either willfully or not willfully being the oppressor, or just benefiting from the oppression of others.
I really love the descriptions of the skin in this poem too. The burnt brass and the complexion of soil, and just really interesting choices to contrast just the kind of whiteness, right?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to do a time check because I'm horrible at that.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes. I sent you some warnings in the chat.
Couldn't see the chat. My bad. So let's bring everybody back and then we will close off. All right, everybody, we are coming to a close. There are a couple more slides, but like I said, in the chat, we're going to throw in all these other resources. I said I had 3 things I wanted to do. Give you some of my thoughts about anti-racism and anti-racist work, examples of classroom activities, and some poems and resources that you can use. If I accomplished that, then I was successful. So that was my standard check, check, check. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and attention. Hopefully you got something useful out of it. And I'm going to stop talking right now.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming. As Matt said, Aishwarya is putting some links in the chat. And don't forget to support Matt directly by following and buying your books. You said you have a chapbook, or do you want to, if you want to put your website, socials, link to your book in the chat so that we can all support you. And for the rest of you, there's plenty more amazing programming happening this weekend. If you're interested in attending more events, check out our website. You can also visit the virtual Small Press Fair, listening to the Improbable Press audio tour, visit the Ekphrastic Gallery, and more. Please follow Mass Poetry on our social media accounts and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. Aishwarya has already put those links in the chat. Any donations from Mass Poetry go to support not just the festival, but our year-round poetry programming, which does include a lot of programming for students and teachers. Thank you so much for coming to this event, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you all. Wonderful meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That was great. Great program.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was terrific.
Thank you.
I'm coming from the Oregon coast. It was worth being here at 7:15.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't know. I think
Yeah,
that's-
thanks, Matt. That was great.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Thank you.
program. Keep up the good work.
Thank you all for your help. Very much appreciated.
It was awesome. I'm so glad I got to volunteer for this session.
Yes, so thank you all, and have a great rest of the festival.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you.